even after the province was cruelly wrested from the sway of their high mightinesses by the combined forces of the British and Yankees, this tavern continued its ancient loyalty.
It is true, the head of the Prince of Orange disappeared from the sign, a strange bird being painted over it, with the explanatory legend of the Wildegans, or the wild goose.
But this, all the world knew to be a sly riddle of the landlord, the worthy Turnus van Giesen, a knowing man in a small way, who laid his finger beside his nose and winked whenever anyone studied the signification of his sign and observed that his goose was hatching and would join the rest of the flock whenever they flew over the water. An enigma which was the perpetual recreation and delight of the loyal but fat-headed burghers of Communipaw.
Under the sway of this patriotic, though discreet and quiet publican, the tavern continued to flourish in primeval tranquility, and was the resort of all true-hearted Netherlanders from all parts of Pavonia who met here to smoke and drink the downfall of Britain and Yankee and success to Admiral Van Tromp.
The only drawback on the comfort of the establishment
Was a nephew of mine host, a sister's son, Jan Joost van der Scamp by name, and a real scamp by nature.
This unlucky whipster showed an early propensity to mischief, which he gratified in a small way by playing tricks upon the frequenters of the Wild Goose.
They're putting gunpowder in their pipes, whips in their pockets, and astonishing them to an explosion while they sat nodding around the fireplace in the barroom.
And if perchance a worthy burgher from some distant part of Pavonia had lingered until dark over his potation, it was odds, but that young Vanderskamp would slip a briar under his horse's tail as he mounted and send him clattering along the road in neck-or-nothing style to his infinite astonishment and discomfiture.
It may be wondered at why mine host of the Wild Goose did not turn such a graceless varlet out of doors.
But Turnus van Giesen was an easy-tempered man, and having no child of his own, looked upon his nephew with almost parental indulgence. His patience and good nature were doomed to be tried by another inmate of his mansion.
This was a cross-grained curmudgeon of a Negro named Pluto, who was somewhat of an enigma in Communipaw. Where he came from, nobody knew.
He was found one morning after a storm, cast like a sea monster on the strand in front of the Wild Goose, and lay there more dead than alive. The neighbors gathered round and speculated on this production of the deep, whether it were fish or flesh, or a compound of both, commonly called a merman. The kind-hearted Turnus van Giesen, seeing that he wore the human form, took him into the house and warmed him into life.
By degrees, he showed signs of intelligence and uttered sounds very much like language, but which no one in Communipaw could understand. Some thought him a Negro who had either fallen overboard or escaped from a slave ship. Nothing, however, could ever draw from him the account of his origin.
When questioned on the subject, he merely pointed to Gibbet Island, a small rocky islet which lies in the bay just opposite Communipaw, as if that were his native place, although everybody knew it had never been inhabited.
In the process of time, he acquired something of the Dutch language. That is to say, he learned all its vocabulary of oaths and maledictions, with just words sufficient to string them together.
Thunder and Blitzen! Oh, thunder and lightning were the gentlest of his ejaculations.
For years he kept about the Wild Goose, more like one of those familiar spirits or household goblins that we read of than like a human being. He acknowledged allegiance to no one, but performed various domestic offices when it suited his humor, waiting occasionally on the guests, grooming the horses, cutting wood, drawing water, and all this without being ordered. Lay any command on him, and the stubborn sea urchin was sure to rebel.
He was never so much at home, however, as when on the water, plying about in his skiff or canoe, entirely alone, fishing, crabbing, or grabbing for oysters.
And would bring home quantities for the larder of the wild goose, which he would throw down at the kitchen door with a growl.
No wind nor weather deterred him from launching forth on his favorite element. Indeed, the wilder the weather, the more he seemed to enjoy it. If a storm was brewing, he was sure to put off from shore, and would be seen far out in the bay, his light skiff dancing like a feather on the waves, when sea and sky were all in a turmoil, and the stoutest ships were fain to lower their sails.
Sometimes on those occasions he would be absent for days together.
How he weathered the tempest, and how and where he subsisted, no one could define, nor did anyone venture to ask, for all had an almost superstitious awe of him.
Some of the Communipaw oystermen declared that they had more than once seen him suddenly disappear, canoe and all, as if they plunged beneath the waves, and after a while come up again in quite a different part of the bay.
Whence they concluded that he could live underwater, much like that notable species of wild duck,
Commonly called the hell diver.
All began to consider him in the light of a foul-weather bird, like the mother carries chicken or stormy petrel, and whenever they saw him putting far out in the bay in cloudy weather, made up their minds for a storm. The only being for whom he seemed to have any liking was Jan Jos Vanderskamp, and him he liked for his very wickedness.
He in a manner took the boy under his tutelage, prompted him to all kinds of mischief, aided him in every wild harum-scarum freak.
Until the lad became a complete scapegrace of the village, a pest to his uncle and to everyone else.
Nor were his pranks confined to the land. He soon learned to accompany old Pluto on the water. Together these worthies would cruise about the broad bay, in skiff or canoe, landing on remote coasts, laying waste orchard and watermelon patches. In short, having a complete system of piracy on a small scale.
Piloted by Pluto, the youthful Vanderskamp soon became acquainted with all the bays, rivers, creeks, and inlets of the watery world around him, could navigate from the Hook to Spiting Devil on the darkest night, and learned to set even the Terror of Hell Gate at defiance.
At length, Negro and boy suddenly disappeared, and days and weeks elapsed, but without tidings of them.
and some say that they had run away and gone off to sea.
Others jocosely hinted that Pluto, being no other than his namesake in disguise, had spirited away the boy to the nether regions.
All, however, could agree on one thing, that the village was well rid of them.
In the process of time, the good Turnus Van Giesen slept with his fathers, and the tavern remained shut up, waiting for a claimant. For the next heir was Jan Jos Vanderskamp, and he had not been heard of for years.
At length, one day, a boat was seen pulling for the shore from a long, black, rakish-looking schooner that lay at anchor at the bay.
The boat's crew seemed worthy of the craft from which they debarked. Never had such a set of noisy, roistering, swaggering harlots landed in peaceful Communipaw. And they were all landish in garb and demeanor.
And we're headed by a rough, burly, bully ruffian with fiery whiskers, a copper nose, a scar across his face, and a great flounderish beaver slouched on one side of his head.
In whom, to their dismay, the quiet inhabitants were made to recognize their early pest, Jan Jost van der Skam.
The rear of this hopeful gang was brought up by old Pluto, who had lost an eye, grown grizzly-headed, and looked more like a devil than ever.
Vanderskamp renewed his acquaintance with the old burghers, much against their will, and in a manner not at all to their taste. He slapped them familiarly on the back, gave them an iron grip of the hand, and was hail fellow well met. According to his own account, he had been all the world over, had made money by bags full, had ships in every sea, and now meant to turn the Wild Goose into a country seat, where he and his comrades, all rich merchants from foreign parts, might enjoy themselves in the interval of their voyages.
Sure enough, in a little while, there was a complete metamorphose of the Wild Goose. From a quiet, peaceful Dutch public house, it became a most riotous and uproarious public dwelling.
A complete rendezvous for boisterous men of the seas, who came here to have what they call the blowout on dry land, and might be seen at all hours lounging about the door.
Or lolling out of the windows, swearing amongst themselves, and cracking rough jokes on every passerby.
Well, the house was fitted up too in so strange a manner. Hammocks slung to the walls instead of bedsteads. Odd kinds of furniture of foreign fashion. Bamboo couches, Spanish chairs, and pistols, cutlasses, and blunderbusses suspended on every peg.
Silver crucifixes on the mantelpieces, silver porringers and candlesticks on the table, contrasting oddly with the pewter and delphite of the original establishment.
And then the strange amusements of these sea monsters.
Pitching Spanish dollars instead of quoits, firing blunderbusses out of the window.
Shooting at a mark, or at any unhappy dog, or cat, or pig, or barn-door fowl that might happen to come within reach.
The only being who seemed to relish their rough waggery was old Pluto.
And yet he led but a dog's life of it, where they practiced all kinds of mean jokes upon him.
Kicked him about like a football.
Shook him by his grisly mop of wool.
I never spoke to him without coupling a curse by way of adjective to his name, and consigning him to the infernal regions.
The fellow, however, seemed to like them the better, the more they cursed him.
Though his utmost expression of pleasure never amounted to more than the growl of a petted bear when his ears are rubbed.
Old Pluto was the minister of the spirit at these orgies of the Wild Goose, and such orgies as took place there. Such drinking, singing, whooping, swearing,
With an occasional interlude of quarreling and fighting.
The noisier grew the revel, the more old Pluto applied the quotations, until the guests would become frantic and merry, smashing everything with his and throwing the house out of
Sometimes, after a drinking bout, they sallied forth and scoured the village, to the dismay of the worthy burghers, who gathered their women within doors and would have shut up the house.
Vanderskamp, however, was not to be rebuffed. He insisted on renewing acquaintance with his old neighbors and on introducing his friends,
The merchants.
to their families, swore he was on the lookout for a wife, and meant, before he stopped, to find husbands for all their daughters.
So will ye, nil ye, sociable he was.
Swaggered about their best parlors with his hat on one side of his head.
Sat on the good wife's nicely waxed mahogany table, kicking his heels against the carved and polished legs.
Kissed and tousled the young frowns.
And if they frowned and pouted, give them a gold rosary or a sparkling cross to put them in good humor again.
Sometimes nothing would satisfy him, but he must have some of his old neighbors to dinner at the Wild Goose.
There was no refusing him.
For he had got the complete upper hand of the community.
And the peaceful burghers all stood in awe of him.
But what a time would the quiet worthy men have among these rake hells? Who would have liked to astound them with the most extravagant gunpowder tales, embroidered with all kinds of foreign oaths?
Clink the can with them, pledge them in deep potations, bawl drinking songs in their ears.
And occasionally fire pistols over their heads.
Or under the table.
And laugh at their faces and ask them how they like the smell of gunpowder.
Thus was the little village of Communipaw for a time, like the unfortunate wight possessed with devils.